topic is Australia's shame, violence against women, causes or solutions you thinking needed. And our speakers are Eva Cox, who I'm sure is well known to all of you, sociologist and activist, and Roxanne McMurray, who is the CEO of the Leichardt Women's Health Community Centre.
Thank you very much for inviting me here today, and thank you, Eva, for being a hard act to follow. My name's Roxanne McMurray, and I'm the manager at Leichardt Women's Community Health Centre, which is your women's health centre in this area, in the inner west and inner city. And we, like a lot of other women's services, see women who are experiencing domestic violence, or are contemplating leaving, or contemplating what to do about it, or are dealing with the after effects of it. So unfortunately it's a bit of bread and butter to what we do. So in terms of the statistics, I'm sure you know them, but I just thought to set the context, 25 women so far this year have been killed through domestic violence in Australia. 39 women so far this year have been killed through violence, gendered violence. 1 in 3 women experience physical violence, have experienced physical violence since the age of 15, and 1 in 5 experience sexual violence from the same age. 1 in 4 women say that they've experienced emotional abuse by a current or a former partner. And 90% of Australian women with an intellectual disability are believed to have been subjected to sexual abuse. And of course we know that Aboriginal women are particularly vulnerable to experiencing violence. So it is a massive, massive problem. And it's also a very costly problem. The economists very helpfully tell us how much it costs. And if I can just find my notes on that, which is somewhere here, I might have to find them later. It's in the tune of billions of dollars, and there's been a projection of what it will cost in 2021 if we don't do something about it. And that magic figure in 2021, if we haven't reduced violence against women, it will have cost $445 million to the Australian economy in that year alone. So overall, the suggestion is that it costs $13.6 billion currently. Now, women's health centres, and there are 17 multidisciplinary women's health centres in New South Wales and 4 special purpose women's health services, as I mentioned before, deal with violence against women as one of the things that they work with women on. We see women in crisis, and we see women when they're starting to understand the reality of their relationships. And one group that we run every fortnight actually at Leichardt starts off with women wanting to come for support for a particular issue, and during the course of the program, which is usually about 8 meetings, they usually realise that they're in a violent relationship, and they do that individually. We don't have to tell them, and in fact we don't tell them, but they put together the pieces themselves, and ultimately are realising that their relationship's really about control and intimidation, and usually there's an element of fear. So fear if they don't comply. Some women, as a result of that, experience the violence physically, and others don't have any money. They might have enough petrol to get to Leichardt, but not enough to get back to Lane Cove. They don't have money for the children's school shoes, and so on. So that's ultimately about control, and controlling her whereabouts and how she lives her life, and controlling the household. So what do we think should be done about it? Well, it's probably a varied levels of variation in terms of a multidisciplinary approach and a cross-government approach. And I completely agree with Eva about needing to work out more about why it happens. I mean, we can see the dynamics once it's happening, and I think we're pretty good at doing that now. And we see the brunt of the absolute worst case of a woman or children murdered. But we don't understand why. And I often ask men, do you know why? Because I don't think as women we actually do. And I think there's some things that as women we probably can't completely understand. And I think men probably have their own story to tell about how they feel and how their friends feel and how their friends cope with stresses and why they might be interested or compelled to control people around them. But in terms of what the solutions could be, I think we do have to think really differently. So the first rule would be you don't cut what exists. And I think based on last year, we know that now. We know that there's, in many areas of the community, there's a lot of infrastructure that's been built up over years. And in the case of the women's refuges, it's been 40 years. So you don't wreck what works and you don't wreck what exists, because it's a really finely tuned ecosystem that takes a long time to establish. So you build on it. So I think rule number one would be you don't take a wrecking ball to the existing network. Healthy relationships in schools. I don't know if you know how that works, but generally speaking, groups that want to run healthy relationships courses in schools need to apply for funding, and they often don't get the funding. Well, it really should be mandatory, I think. And it should, why can't it be from the time that children are in kindergarten, talking about respectful relationships? And in a way, teachers and childcarers already do that when they're talking to little ones about not taking other children's toys from them. So can't we just have a bit more of a deliberate focus on what is respect and respectful relationships? And that'll cost money, and it'll cost to change the curriculum. But if we don't start with children when they're little, really almost in nappies, 1 year old, then I think we're never going to change the tide. We're always going to be catching people when they're in their teens or when they're older, and we're always going to be running to catch up. So that's really the first approach. Refuges, I may be biased on this, but I believe refuges need to be run by specialists. And there's no doubt about that. And they need to be designated to that particular issue. So if they're focusing on women and children escaping domestic violence, that's their job. That's what they should do. And they do it very well. If they focus on single women, so women without children, women who may not have children or women who've had their children removed, that's what they should do, because women without children aren't going to do as well in a refuge with women with children. There are different needs and competing priorities. Women with mental illness, they need their own specialist services. Women with drug and alcohol dependency need theirs, and so on. And all of this takes money. But it is a system that we did have partly in place last year, and now we're trying to work with the government to restore or improve some of it back to what there was, and hopefully again to build on that. Women's health centres, again a particular sort of love, but women's health centres do extraordinary work, and in New South Wales we're fortunate to have 17 of them, and as I mentioned before, the 4 special purpose services. Well, they can actually do a lot more if they were better resourced. So you can see where this is going. It's all about money. We need community legal centres. It's an outrage that they've had their funding threatened, an absolute outrage. And I can't tell you the devastation that that will wreak if any of them are, in fact, cut or they have to cut staff. There are people who cannot afford to pay a lawyer, and at $400 to $500 an hour, really, who can. There are people who rely on community legal centres to help them through the most difficult matters in their life, and often at a time when they're absolutely desperate and they have nothing. So that's a given, and I think as a humane society we should stand up for justice. Obviously we need the police to be fully informed and educated and sensitive to the issues, and the police have improved a lot. They've put a lot of effort into that over the last several years. So they should be encouraged to keep doing that. And that they're in the unenviable position of often being in the lounge room or the kitchen when these situations are unfolding. So a privileged position in a sense, because they're actually in the home and they get to see the home where violence is occurring. But it's complex, and they need to be able to recognise who the perpetrator is and who the victim is, and the circumstances around that, because that can set people in that situation up on a course that's either a positive experience in a difficult time or a really destructive experience. A couple of things that the state government's looking at doing at the moment, which is the Register of Violent Offenders. Now look, that's probably not going to help an overwhelming number of people, but it probably does two things. It gives people the right to ask about a partner. So if a woman or her family or friends have a concern, they have the right to ask about someone's history. Of course, that person needs to have been convicted, they need to have had a record. But nevertheless, there's something wrong if you can't ask, actually. So I say tick that box and let's just get that done. Transferability of AVOs, well, that should just be a paper exercise. Surely the states are going to agree. I think we should stop talking about what a great thing it's going to be and just do it. It should have probably been done a long time ago. Electronic devices, which is another initiative that they're talking about doing. Again, yes, just do it. It'll only apply to people who are in that particular situation, but still, it's probably a basic approach. The Safer Pathways program, which is a linkage, it's sort of building on, changing a bit of policy that we've had where women most at risk are identified in the system. This state government's rolling that out, trialling that at the moment, and if that works well, there will be better coordination of women who are most at risk. So a lot of these are the band-aids that you're talking about, Eva. Our Watch, which is a national capacity building program, awareness raising program, they're in Victoria, and every state should just sign on to that, and they can advocate for national standards and achievements on the national level. And then probably enough about awareness raising, because I think the media is doing a fantastic job of awareness raising at the moment, and there really doesn't need to be millions and millions poured into it. I think, aren't we all feeling like we're completely soaked in domestic violence at the moment? And then there are various other initiatives like apps on smartphones for young women, and all of that adds up to a picture of, if it's all linked up and the message is all the same, a really clear response and with a strong element of prevention. But you know, if White Ribbon's working and the Male Champions for Change are working, Elizabeth Broderick's Male Champions for Change, support those, and absolutely support the footy clubs, because that's where men meet and it's obviously a safe environment for them to talk and open up. So I think it all adds up to saying that domestic violence is not okay, it's not condoned, and look at all of these levels throughout our funding system and business and our community that says it's not okay and we won't accept it. But I think, you know, ultimately, and I'm just going to throw this out there, men, we do need to understand more about why it happens and why it's overwhelmingly men against women. But I think women also need to know that if they're in that situation, it's not going to change. So it may change down the track for other women that come after them, other generations. But right there and then, if your partner is being abusive, if he's being controlling, the only way that's going to change for you is for you to leave, or for him to leave, whatever the situation may be, because it's just such a long, slow road to expect a person to change, particularly if they don't want to, and particularly in such a complex matrix of emotions and reasons that often we can't understand.